When heaven speaks, it does not stutter. The voice of God rarely arrives with comfort, but always with clarity. And now, that voice is moving through time, through thresholds, through everything once called familiar, calling forth a departure, not merely from a place, but from a version of existence that can no longer contain what has been divinely placed within. There are moments that arrive like wind shifting in the desert, silent, invisible, indéniable. Something within begins to stir, not with noise, but with knowing. The season has shifted, the grace has lifted. What once felt alive now echoes hollow. The tent is still pitched, but the cloud has already moved on. The land that was once provision now feels like restraint. It is in this holy tension that a command is whispered, a call that has echoed since the dawn of faith. The Word of God declares in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household, to the land I will show you." This is the first note of every divine migration, not a map, a mandate, not details, direction. The place of origin must be left behind, not just the physical geography, but the inner atmosphere, patterns, fears, names, titles, and assignments that once made sense in the old country but will strangle growth in the new land. There is no room in this next season for divided allegiance. The past cannot travel where promise is leading. One must loosen the grip, step out, trust the compass of the Spirit more than the landmarks of memory. The departure will cost comfort, but it will deliver clarity. The unfamiliar has always been the classroom of the called. Mountains are not climbed from the center of the campfire. Rivers are not crossed by those who stare too long at the banks. What is being asked now is not a casual adjustment, it is a radical leaving. Not because where you've been was evil, but because where you're going is holy. The nest must break for the wings to stretch. The soil must be overturned before the seed can rise. And the voice that calls out from the unknown does not speak in riddles, it speaks in release. Let go. Step forward. No attachments. No explanations. No delay. There is a time when the Spirit disrupts comfort to ignite calling. That time is now. The journey ahead will not respond to past logic. The signs will not resemble yesterday's answers. And the light will not illuminate the full path, only the next step. This is not abandonment. It is alignment. When God calls someone out, He is not removing identity, He is refining it. Everything lost along the way becomes the space where promise takes root. What feels like subtraction is divine mathematics. What looks like isolation is sacred initiation. And the longer one hesitates, the louder the silence becomes. The instruction is clear. Go to the land I will show you. Not the land you can research, not the land others have described, but the land He will reveal on the way. Vision will follow obedience. Revelation always waits on the other side of surrender. This is the pattern of the faithful. Leave what is known. Trust what is unseen. Step with nothing but a word, and the word is enough. The departure is not always dramatic. Often, it begins in the heart. A key turning, a silent décision, a final refusal to keep circling the same mountain. For some, the land to be left is not a city, but a system, not a place, but a posture, not people. But patterns. And until these inner borders are crossed, the outer land cannot be occupied. Every threshold demands something die, not to destroy, but to transform. The altar always precedes the answer, and those who step into covenant must first walk away from convenience. For the one who senses this moment, who feels the breath of heaven nudging the sails, let this be confirmation. You are not crazy. You are being called. Type 999". The comments not as routine, but as response. A declaration that you will move when he speaks, that you will release when he calls, that you will go where the map has yet to be drawn. And if this word has found its way to your soul, do not let it pass in silence. Like, share, subscribe. Let the sound of obedience ripple. For others are waiting on the courage they see in you to find their own. The wind is rising. The cloud is moving. The call has been spoken. Step forward. The land is not yet named, but it is promised. There is a rhythm beneath every disruption, an eternal pulse that does not waver when structures fall or patterns break. What appears as sudden change is often the unfolding of something ancient, something whispered into existence before time began. This moment, this shift, this unraveling, it is not chaos. It is choreography. The hand of God does not tremble. His guidance does not falter. And though the root may twist and the night may fall heavy, every step remains within his sovereign grasp. What you see as fragmentation, heaven sees as preparation. The breaking of one thing is often the birthing of another. You are not wandering in a wilderness of mistakes. You are being guided through a valley of realignment. The path beneath your feet has been allowed to shake, not to shame you, but to shape you. The ending of familiar patterns, the disintegration of what once made sense, none of this is random. The Word of God declares in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." All things, not just the gentle things, not just the blessings that arrive wrapped in clarity and peace. All things, the closed doors, the betrayals, the unexpected endings, the silence, the surrender, even the pain that seemed wasted is being woven into divine purpose. Nothing is slipping through his fingers. What has been allowed to fall apart was never built to carry the weight of your future. When God begins to call a life higher, he dismantles everything that is rooted in fear, pride, or comfort. The scaffolding begins to shake. The foundations not laid by him begin to crack. And though your surroundings may feel unstable, your calling is becoming unshakable. There is a sacred disorientation that comes before true clarity. A time when what once brought direction now brings doubt. It is not punishment, it is promotion. God does not lead with explanations, he leads with purpose. And those who are called must learn to walk without sight, trusting not in the visible, but in the voice that spoke them into existence. The shift you are experiencing is not an accident. It is a holy migration, a moving away from everything that no longer serves your assignment, the relationships that dried up, the places that no longer fit, the doors that slammed shut without warning. These are not obstacles, they are answers. Heaven's no is often louder than its yes. When all else grows quiet, when the ground gives way beneath your plans, listen deeper. The silence carries instruction, the stillness carries strategy, and the surrender unlocks strength. God does not recycle pain without purpose. The discomfort you feel is the stretching of your spirit, The fire is refining you, not consuming you. The delay is not denial. It is the alignment of timing and character. There is a place being prepared for those who will not cling to expired seasons, and this place cannot be entered with divided hearts or distracted minds. The refining process is painful. Yes, but it is also prophetic. It removes what cannot stay and reveals what must rise. You have not been left behind. You are being drawn out. Just as a seed must break open in the dark before it sees the light, so too must everything false in your life rupture before the truth of your identity emerges. This is divine order. First the shaking, then the settling, first the tearing, then the tailoring. To love God is not to be spared from suffering, it is to be secured through it. To be called is not to escape fire, it is to be preserved in the flame. Every moment of confusion is still within the coordinates of providence. Every unanswered question is held within the silence of sovereignty. And so, when the plan crumbles, do not panic. When the path vanishes, do not turn back. When the night stretches longer than you expected, do not sleep in sorrow. God is working all things for your good. And the good He works is not comfort, it is calling fulfilled. Let go of the need to understand. Embrace the need to trust. You are not the builder. You are the vessel. The architect knows what he's doing. And though the blueprint has changed in your hands, it has never changed in His. What is being dismantled now is clearing space for glory. The hand that allowed the breaking will also perform the blessing. And when it all comes together, you'll see every closed door was a corridor. Every loss was a ladder. Every silence was a setup. All things, yes, even this, are working together. There are weights that feel holy, but were never heaven sent. Some chains shine like gold, but corrode the soul in silence. Not all burdens come from rebellion. Some come from misplaced devotion. And it is here, in the quiet wrestle of obedience, that God begins to separate the sacred from the self-imposed. The heaviness you feel isn't always warfare. Sometimes it's evidence you've been carrying what heaven never asked for. Roles you were never assigned. Fights you were never called to. Expectations born not of grace, but of guilt. And like a tree sagging beneath fruit, it was never meant to bear. Your branches have begun to bow. Heaven sees it. And so, the divine unraveling begins. Slowly, faithfully, painfully, God begins to loosen what you gripped too tightly, not to shame you, but to spare you, not to break your strength, but to reveal that your strength was never meant to be the source. We find in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verse 1, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." Everything that hinders. Not just sin, not just rebellion, but everything, even the weight of good intentions, even the pressure to uphold what's no longer aligned with your assignment, even the version of yourself you built to survive what God has already delivered you from. When God calls, He doesn't just give instructions, He removes interference. The dead weight cannot come. The false yokes cannot last. You cannot outrun weariness when you're entangled in what should have been surrendered long ago. You weren't called to impress. You were called to run. And that run begins with the throwing off. This is not cruelty. This is calibration. Heaven is not stripping you to leave you empty. It is lightening you to make you ready. For the race ahead requires agility of spirit, and clarity of focus. And you cannot possess either while dragging the remains of expired seasons. Look around. What is slowing you down that you've called necessary? What have you protected that has secretly poisoned your pace? What has taken root in your hands that should have never grown in your heart? The fire of God does not only consume wickedness, it also consumes excess. That's why things are being removed with such precision. That's why comfort has become confrontation. That's why doors you tried to pry open refuse to budge. Because He's not just preparing you to enter, He's preparing you to last once you do. The unburdening is sacred. Let Him take the role you outgrew. Let Him remove the opinions you feared. Let Him release you from the identity shaped by your past wounds. Even if it feels like loss, especially then. For anything God asks you to lay down is making space for something greater. To the outside world, this shedding may look like weakness, but in the Spirit, it is warfare, and your surrender is your sword. You're not just being emptied, you're being made ready. And what feels like subtraction is the first sign of supernatural acceleration. You don't have to understand the pruning to submit to it. Trust the gardener. Trust the hands that formed you to know what no longer fits the frame of your future. This moment is not about producing more, it's about carrying less, so that the pace you walk isn't fueled by fear, but by freedom. The race marked for you was never meant to be run in chains, not even shiny ones. So when you feel the tug to release, don't resist. Heaven is not taking something from you, it is making room to pour into you. Now, if you sense this word cutting chords in your soul, if you know you've been dragging what should have been dropped, take a moment and respond, not with many words. Just one act of spiritual alignment. Comment, lay it down. End quote. Type these 3 words not as a ritual, but as a release. It is a prophetic confession, simple on the surface, but loaded with surrender. When you say, lay it down, you are telling heaven that you are ready to let go of what is heavy, false, and no longer fruitful. You're saying, I trust you more than I trust what I've been holding. You're choosing freedom over familiarity. Let your fingers type what your spirit already knows. You're not meant to carry this anymore. This is your line in the sand. Your moment of spiritual clarity. Your quiet, yes, that shakes the grip of yesterday from your shoulders. There comes a point in every journey where the door closes not quietly, but with a finality that leaves no room for questions. It does not creak, nor pause halfway. It shuts, and the echo of that closing becomes its own kind of sermon. For the soul attentive enough to listen, it is not a rejection, it is a redirection. The seal is not a punishment, it is a divine boundary. Closed doors speak. They say what words cannot. They mark the end of seasons that lingered too long. They declare that what was once permissible is no longer aligned. Most importantly, they whisper that heaven is no longer in that place. There are doors we knock on, not because they are right, but because they are familiar. Doors we plead with, because they once opened easily. But when grace lifts, even the most beautiful doors become barricades. Even the warmest invitations begin to feel hollow. God closes doors, not to hurt, but to guard, to preserve your life from being tethered to what cannot hold your future. Sometimes, the only way forward is sealed behind the silence of a closed door. And yet, how we respond in that moment reveals everything. The flesh mourns. The spirit knows. The heart wavers. But heaven remains firm. Closed doors test not only your obedience, but your trust. They are a question written in wood and silence. Do you believe I know what you cannot see? It was proclaimed in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 7. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. End quote. This is not metaphor, it is decree. When God shuts a door, it is sealed with sovereignty. When he opens one, it is no longer optional, it becomes the way. Trying to force your way back into what he has closed will not restore you. It will only delay you. There is nothing more dangerous than trying to reopen what God has already shut. When you force your way back into old patterns, old relationships, old titles, you aren't stepping into purpose, you're stepping out of covering. The glory does not linger at graves. It moves forward. The prophet Samuel mourned for Saul long after the Lord had moved on. Then the word of the Lord came not with comfort, but confrontation. How long will you mourn for Saul? Since I have rejected him. There was anointing waiting to be poured, a king to be found. But Samuel still stood at a closed door. There is a danger in overextending mourning, a cost to staying too long in what's already sealed. Some doors aren't temporarily shut, they're eternally finished. And no amount of prayer or pleading will open what heaven has already called complete. To move forward, you must interpret closure correctly. If you call a closed door a failure, you'll carry shame. If you call it abandonment, you'll grow bitter. But if you call it God, you will walk in freedom. Closed doors protect you from success in the wrong direction. They prevent you from marrying comfort instead of calling. And though it stings, the pain of loss is lighter than the cost of misalignment. What stands before you now is not a barrier, but a choice. Will you wait at the threshold of what once worked, or turn your face to the unknown where the cloud has already moved? To follow God is to accept the finality of his no, not as rejection, but as rescue. Some doors close not because you failed, but because you've grown. You've outgrown assignments that once defined you. Your spirit is too wide for rooms that once felt right. That's not pride. That's obedience. Refuse to romanticize the past. Don't call a prison a sanctuary just because it's familiar. When the cloud lifts, when the fire moves, when the voice says go, then staying becomes disobedience. Do not ask for keys to places heaven has evacuated. Instead, discern the shift, honor the closure, and prepare to move. Every closed door is a sign in the kingdom, not the end, but redirection, not rejection, but reformation. There is oil for what's next, but it cannot be poured where grief still honors what God has ended. At some point, you must rise, fill your horn with fresh oil, move forward. Even if you do not yet see the destination, God isn't hiding the door. He's shifting your position so you'll see the right one. And what's ahead will not require mourning-only movement. You were not born to fit in among the crowd. There has always been a distinction on your life, a quiet difference, a holy disruption in your spirit that could never be explained, only carried. You tried to walk like them, talk like them, plan like them, but no matter how much you blended, the light never left you. And that light is the very thing that made the darkness uncomfortable. There are those who misunderstood you. They saw your caution as pride, your silence as arrogance, your boundaries as rejection. But what they never understood was that you were being set apart. and being set apart is rarely celebrated by the crowd. In fact, it usually gets you pushed out. You were never excluded. You were preserved. God's chosen vessels are not molded in public, they are refined in private. You were never hidden because you were weak. You were hidden because you were being hardened, humbled, hallowed, set apart, not only for purpose, but for purity. Everything you lost, every table you weren't invited to, every circle you outgrew, every stage you never stepped on was divine protection. Heaven kept you from things you once called opportunity, because those very things would have diluted your oil. You were not born to entertain the crowd. You were born to confront kingdoms. That's why the warfare against your identity has been so loud. The enemy did not attack you because you were weak, but because you were dangerous. You carry something that exposes lies without speaking. You walk into rooms and spirits get agitated, not because you're proud, but because your presence carries assignment. The Word of God declares in the second letter to Timothy, chapter 2, verse 21, those who cleanse themselves will be instruments for special purposes, made holy, useful to the Master, and prepared to do any good work. You are not ordinary. You are an instrument in the hands of God. That's why your process was not quick. That's why your road was not smooth. Heaven does not rush what it intends to last. You were never delayed. You were being distilled, purified of people-pleasing, stripped of superficial pursuits, refined until nothing remained but real obedience. And now, the moment of revealing draws near. But make no mistake, this is not about being seen. This is about being sent. The world does not need more noise. It needs clarity. It needs those whose voices carry weight because their lives have been forged in fire. It needs those who are unbought, unshaken, and unafraid to confront culture with consecration. This is your unveiling, but it is also your test. Because when the favor begins to flow, will you remember the furnace? When doors open that once refused you, will you still bow your head before His feet? When the spotlight warms your skin, will you still walk in the shadow of His wings? Chosen one, stay grounded, stay pure, stay dangerous in your devotion. And if this word has stirred something deep within your spirit, if it has brought clarity to your silence and confirmation to your struggle, then help it reach someone else who's still walking in the wilderness. Like this message, so others can find it. Share it with someone who's been quietly questioning if they were ever truly called. Subscribe so you don't miss the words that continue to flow from this stream. And if the Spirit leads you, sow a seed. Your support helps keep this message alive, free, and reaching the remnant across nations. This is not about following a voice. It's about fueling a vision that calls people out of darkness and into divine clarity. You are not just a listener. You are part of a rising movement. You are part of the sound that shakes systems. You are part of the light that pierces through layers of compromise and confusion. You are not stepping into popularity. You are stepping into prophetic alignment. The silence was not your end. It was your sanctuary. And now, what heaven hid, heaven will highlight. But don't chase the crowd. Chase the cloud. Your time in the wilderness was not wasted. The isolation produced oil. The delay forged endurance. And the rejection clarified identity. And now, the voice that called you in the cave is calling you to rise. Step forward, not for applause, but for assignment. Not for comfort, but for confrontation. Not for recognition, but for release. Because you are not just called, you are marked. And the earth is groaning for the revelation of those who have been set apart for such a time as this. Transition does not always come with applause. Often, it arrives in silence, wrapped in discomfort, sealed in unfamiliarity. But for those with ears to hear, there is a sound beneath the stillness, a divine summons, calling you to cross over, not just in geography, but in identity, not just in motion, but in mindset. There are spiritual thresholds where the atmosphere shifts, and heaven says, you can't stay here anymore. Not because you've failed, but because you've fulfilled. The assignment on this side has expired. The anointing for this space has lifted. What once flowed now feels forced. That is not regression. That is divine release. The wilderness you've walked through wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And now, just like Israel stood at the edge of the Jordan, you are standing at a crossing. What's behind you is too small. What's ahead is too great for the version of you that has survived thus far. God is not just bringing you through something, He's bringing you into something. But between the old and the new, there is always the river. And that river will test your resolve. It won't wait for your full understanding. It won't part for your convenience. It will stand in your way and ask one question: do you trust the one who brought you this far? The prophet Elijah spoke as recorded in the book of Joshua. Chapter 3, verse 5, consecrate yourselves. For tomorrow, the Lord will do amazing things among you. Before you step into the next, there must be a setting apart, not external ceremony, but internal cleansing. God will not place new glory upon compromised ground. You cannot bring old fears into this next promise. You cannot carry yesterday's coping into tomorrow's covenant. You must cross over clean, not perfect, but purified. And purification always begins with obedience. When the priest stepped into the Jordan, it had not yet parted. The waters did not move because of insight or emotion. They moved because of obedience. The soles of their feet touched what looked impassable, and that touch activated a miracle. This next season will require that same kind of courage. Not the courage to be loud, but the courage to step when nothing has moved, yet the courage to obey when there is no guarantee, no evidence, no applause, just the word. You are crossing over into promises that eyes have not seen and ears have not heard. But the journey will cost you something. It will cost comfort. It will cost excuses. It will cost the convenience of being lukewarm. And it will require a leaving not just from people, but from patterns. Some bridges must be burned because they lead back to bondage. Some doors must remain closed because they open to dysfunction. Some names must remain in your past because they do not speak to your future. When God calls you to cross over, He also calls you to come up higher. This is not just transition, it is transformation. He is not upgrading your surroundings. He is overhauling your soul. The insecurities that used to govern your decisions must be drowned in the river. The fear of man that used to delay your obedience must be buried at the banks. This is a cutting season. The wilderness taught you to depend. Now the crossing will teach you to lead. You are not crossing over as a victim. You are stepping in as a vessel, marked, prepared, assigned. And what you're carrying is not just for you. There are people on the other side waiting for your obedience to unlock their freedom. This crossing is generational. What you step into will affect bloodlines. What you say yes to will ripple through legacy. This is not just a moment, it is a mantle, and those who carry it must be clean, clear, and committed. And so, if this word has found you at your river, if your spirit knows it cannot return to the old, but your eyes have yet to see the new, then take this moment to mark the crossing. Comment 444. Type it not as superstition, but as submission, as a prophetic act of obedience, a declaration that you are stepping out of the wilderness and into the promise, that you are leaving behind survival and walking in assignment, that you are done negotiating with the old and ready to carry the new. Why 444? Because 4 is the number of divine establishment seen in the 4 corners of the earth. The 4 winds, the 4 living creatures around the throne. It represents structure, foundation, and spiritual government. When heaven repeats a number, it is emphasizing urgency and confirmation. 444 is not just a number, it's a prophetic signal that the old order is complete, that alignment has come, that divine covering is moving with you. To type 444 is to say, God, I'm ready for the new foundation. I'm ready to walk in what you have firmly established. Let this be more than numbers on a screen. Let it be a spiritual echo in heaven. Delay is not denial, though time has stretched and answers have felt distant. The hand of God has not withdrawn. There are seasons when the stillness grows louder than any storm, and in that quiet, the soul begins to ask dangerous questions. Has God forgotten me? Has heaven passed me by? Was the promise real or just imagination? But heaven's silence is never careless. Divine delay is never random. When God withholds a thing, it is not because he is absent, it is because he is building. Hidden beneath the waiting is a foundation being laid in dimensions you cannot see. It is a mercy that interrupts premature release. For what good is a gift received before the soul is ready to carry it? Delay is heaven's defense against collapse. It is the loving restraint of a father who refuses to let you step into a place that would crush you, not because you're not worthy of it, but because he's preparing you to sustain what he's promised. You asked for the promise, but he's preparing the capacity. You longed for arrival, but he's fortifying your endurance. You prayed for the doors to open, but he knows that without deep roots, the winds of increase would tear you down. We find in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 3, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time. It hastens toward the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it will certainly come. It will not delay." End quote. What looks like a stall is really synchronization. What feels late is actually strategic alignment. And the truth is, you haven't been waiting on God, he's been waiting on you. Waiting for your character to match the weight of your calling. Waiting for your motives to be purified. Waiting for your dependence to shift from people to his voice alone. The delay is sacred. It does not diminish your anointing, it protects it. Like Joseph in the prison, falsely accused and seemingly forgotten, but even in confinement, he was being conditioned. He was learning to steward influence before it was ever granted. The pit was not punishment, it was positioning. Because when Pharaoh's call finally came, Joseph wasn't rusty. He was ready. Delay does not mean disqualification. Delay means development. If God had opened the door too soon, you would have walked in insecure. You would have questioned the calling. You would have tried to validate your presence instead of carrying authority. And so, he waited not because you weren't chosen, but because your strength was still forming. There are muscles that only grow in stillness: trust, patience, discernment, the kind of spiritual maturity that doesn't shout for attention but walks with quiet confidence. And if you've been walking through delay, it doesn't mean the promise is shrinking. It means the promise is settling, digging into the soil of time, anchoring itself so deeply that when it emerges, it will not be shaken. Heaven doesn't build on shallow ground. The waiting is uncomfortable, but necessary. It is in the stillness that old ambitions fall away, that pride gets exposed, that idols are torn down, that your heart learns to love his face more than his hand. And only then, when you no longer need the promise to feel secure, will he trust you to carry it. Because the promise is not the prize, his presence is. And when you learn that, you're no longer held hostage by the timeline. So many abandon their post in the 11th hour, just before the shift. They grow weary, not realizing that the pressure of waiting was actually the final stage of breakthrough. Don't lose heart now. Delay is not your enemy. Impatience is. What's coming doesn't need your manipulation. It needs your maturity. The moment will come when the wind changes, when the door swings open, when the vision that felt suspended in time suddenly aligns, and when it does, you will walk into it not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with a holy stillness that only waiting could have produced. You will know the silence wasn't wasted. It was sacred. You'll realize you weren't stuck. You were being sheltered, not passed over, but preserved. And when the timing finally unfolds, you'll thank God for every door that stayed shut, for every no, for every delay, for every hidden moment where your faith grew stronger, your voice clearer, and your dependence deeper. Because now, when the weight of destiny rests on your shoulders, you'll be able to stand. When God begins to shift you, he doesn't always change your surroundings first. He repositions your spirit, long before the move is visible. The alignment begins within. Your appetite starts to change. What once entertained you now feels empty. What once satisfied now leaves you restless. You can't explain it, but something deep in your core begins to resist what you used to tolerate. This is the signal of divine repositioning, not relocation in the natural, but transformation in the spiritual. You are not being pushed out, you are being pulled up. You are being aligned with something greater than your comfort zone, his divine will. In this shift, God does not ask for your preferences. He asks for your posture. Because this shift is not about achievement, it is about assignment. And assignment often requires disconnection from what is familiar, not because the familiar was evil, but because it is no longer sufficient. You can't live in Canaan with the mindset of Egypt. You can't carry revival with hands still full of routine. You can't walk in the new while defending the old. Scripture declares in the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, verse 9, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Divine repositioning begins with divine surrender. It asks you to trade your logic for his wisdom, to release the framework of your 5-year plan for a moment-by-moment walk of trust. It's not convenient. It doesn't cater to control. It often looks like losing, but in heaven's eyes, it's gain. Repositioning may strip you of titles, platforms, recognition, even relationships. And yet, in the stripping, God is not subtracting. He is recalibrating. He is removing what no longer matches the weight of your next. The more precise your assignment becomes, the fewer attachments you can carry. There is no elevation without elimination. The season you're stepping into cannot afford divided loyalties. You will not be able to carry double identities, one for God, one for others. This repositioning will demand a full surrender of image. It will break your dependency on validation, and it will place you in spaces where your only clarity will come from His voice. Not every wilderness is punishment. Some are training grounds for those He trusts. God is calling you deeper, not wider. He is not scattering your efforts. He is focusing your fire. There is too much at stake for you to remain in surface-level motion. Heaven is assigning precision to your next steps. This is why certain doors no longer excite you, why some invitations don't carry the same weight, why conversations you used to enjoy now feel hollow. You are not arrogant. You are being awakened. You are not bored. You are being redirected. And in this repositioning, clarity doesn't always arrive in full sentences. Sometimes, God leads you with an unease, a subtle tension that won't let you settle. It's not anxiety, it's acceleration. The cloud has moved, and your spirit knows it, even before your surroundings catch up. So don't resist the stirring. Don't explain it away. Don't try to anchor yourself in a harbor He's already called you to depart from. If your spirit is restless, it may be because your assignment is shifting. God will not promote your plans when your heart is anchored in comfort. He will shake what can be shaken, not to punish, but to position. Sometimes the shift looks like rejection, but it's redirection. Sometimes it feels like exile, but it's elevation. Sometimes it sounds like silence, but it's strategy. And often, before He repositions your feet, He will reposition your focus. You'll begin to see differently, to desire differently, to move differently. This is not the moment to run back to what's safe. This is the moment to yield fully. Repositioning always precedes release. Before Joseph was placed in the palace, he was repositioned in a prison. Before David wore the crown, he was repositioned to fields of isolation. Before Jesus stepped into public ministry, he was repositioned to the wilderness. There, the voice of man grew quiet, and the voice of God grew loud. Let God position you where no spotlight shines, where no applause is heard, where obedience costs more than comfort. Because what is born in hidden surrender carries the kind of glory that can stand in open warfare. He is not changing your life to confuse you. He is aligning you for fullness. And when the repositioning is complete, you won't have to force your place. You won't have to beg for favor. You won't have to hustle to be seen. Heaven will place you where fruit flows, and no man can uproot what God has planted. There are seasons when heaven grows quiet, not because God has withdrawn, but because He wants you to draw closer. You look around, and what once felt alive now seems muted. Familiar voices lose their clarity. Old wells feel dry. Even your own prayers seem to fall into a still sky. And yet, in that holy hush, something sacred is happening. Your hearing is being recalibrated. This is not punishment. It's preparation. You're being trained to recognize Him not in thunder, not in lightning, but in the stillness. God is not speaking less. He's drawing you deeper. He's refining your frequency. The distractions are being silenced, so your soul can finally tune into the whisper. Moses didn't meet God in the campfire. He met him in the cloud, a place where everything else faded, a place where silence wrapped around revelation like a cloak. In the stillness of the book of Job, chapter 33, verse 14, it is written, "For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it." He speaks in ways we least expect, not just in burning bushes or parted seas, but through moments that feel like delay, through unanswered prayers, through tension in your chest that refuses to be named. The whisper may not thunder through your ears, but it will stir your spirit if you're paying attention. Be still, he says, not to slow you down, but to draw you in. Stillness is not inactivity. It is intentional alignment. In a world addicted to motion, silence is a revolutionary act of trust. When you become still before God, you're saying, your whisper matters more than the world's volume. Most miss his voice because they're looking for spectacle. They wait for the dramatic, for the obvious. But the maturing soul learns to find him in the mundane, in the pause between breaths, in the weight of still air, in the sacred question, God, are you here? And the peaceful awareness that follows, yes, even now, especially now. This is why your ears have become more sensitive, why noise feels unbearable, why shallow conversations drain you. Your discernment is under divine renovation. He is rewiring the way you hear. Because the next assignment won't come with thunder, it'll come with trust. And trust doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. You are not being ignored. You are being immersed into a dimension of faith where you stop relying on confirmation and start relying on communion. This is not about getting a word. It's about becoming one who lives by the word. The crowd waits for signs, but those who are marked wait for silence, because they know that in the stillness, strategies are birthed. In the hush, boldness is forged, and in the whisper, destinies are confirmed. This is not emotional hype. This is spiritual tuning. The Spirit is drawing you into places where the voice of the shepherd is the only voice that matters, where you don't need music to feel his presence, and you don't need applause to affirm your direction, where his breath becomes your compass, where his stillness becomes your strategy. That's why your old rhythm no longer fits, why old mentors feel distant, why even spiritual routines feel like scaffolding around a structure that's already complete. God is tearing away dependency, not so you're left alone, but so you're left with only him, and that's enough. So what does this silence mean? It means you're growing. It means he trusts you. It means he no longer has to shout to be heard. It means the surface has been cleared so that the root can finally go deeper. And in this quiet, this holy quiet, you will hear again. You'll hear instruction no one else catches. You'll hear conviction that no one else recognizes. You'll hear your name spoken, not for performance, but for purpose. And once you've heard him there, you won't chase noise ever again. So if this word mirrors your current place, if the silence has been real, if the whisper has been louder than the storm, then let your spirit respond in surrender. Comment, whisper, and I'll follow. These 4 words are not empty. They are a vow, a quiet but courageous declaration that even in stillness, you recognize his voice, that the whisper is enough, that the shepherd's breath is all the compass you need, that even without a map, his murmur moves you more than man's megaphone. You're not asking for details, just direction, not noise, just presence. Type it, pray it, Live it. Let this be the signal to heaven that your posture is ready, your ears are tuned, and your heart will follow, even into the unseen. There is a sacred kind of obedience that does not look impressive. It doesn't come with applause or spotlight. It happens in quiet choices, behind closed doors, under the weight of surrender. The world calls it letting go. Heaven calls it alignment. You cannot walk in divine authority while still tethered to expired places. There comes a moment when everything around you feels mismatched, not because you're out of place, but because your spirit has outgrown the environment it once tolerated. God is not asking for additions to your life in this season. He's requiring subtractions. There are things you must unfollow, not just on screens, but in your soul. Unfollow the voice of comparison. Unfollow the expectation of people who never knew your calling. Unfollow the pressure to perform, to impress, to meet silent standards you were never assigned to carry. Unfollow the cycles that keep you bound to false peace and hidden frustration. You can't carry what's next while still clinging to what's finished. This is the season where pruning becomes proof. The hand of God is removing access to everything that cannot stay, not to isolate you, but to identify you. You are not being emptied for pain. You are being cleared for purpose. And purpose rarely moves with a crowd. When Jesus called his disciples, he said, "Follow me." He did not say, "Follow comfort, culture, trends, or timelines." He did not ask them to maintain balance with their old life. He called them out, away from nets, away from identity built on labor, away from attachments that couldn't see the cross ahead. And that same voice still calls today. You've been trying to manage both, the old and the new, the assignment and the approval, the oil and the opinions. But there is no neutral in purpose. Delay becomes disobedience when obedience is clear. Scripture captures this tension in Luke chapter 9. Verse 62, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God." Looking back isn't always about regret. Sometimes it's about addiction to what's familiar. But God is not calling you to be familiar. He is calling you to be faithful. And faithfulness requires a forward gaze. You're not unfollowing out of bitterness. You're unfollowing out of obedience. You're disconnecting, not to punish others, but to protect the purity of what God is birthing in you. Because sacred things cannot survive in divided atmospheres. You're not just leaving places, you're leaving patterns. You're no longer available to the dysfunction that used to feel normal. You're no longer a subscriber to spiritual shallowness. You're no longer logging into cycles that drain your faith. Heaven has logged you out so that it can launch you forward. And yes, it may cost you certain connections. It may confuse those who can't discern your season. But you weren't called to make sense. You were called to make impact, to follow the narrow path, to step out of the algorithm and into the anointing. This is not a trend. It's a transition. And some of you reading this know it. You've felt it for months. That holy irritation, that sense that you don't belong where you once fit perfectly, that nothing wrong has happened, but everything now feels misaligned. That's not spiritual fatigue, it's divine invitation. God is saying, "Come out from among them and be separate, not in arrogance, but in clarity, not in judgment, but in pursuit, because the more set apart you are, the more clearly you'll see what others can't. And when clarity increases, compromise becomes impossible. So let go, unfollow, unsubscribe from the noise that clouds your discernment, and watch as peace rushes in like a river. And if this word has pierced your soul, if you feel the weight of this moment pressing on your spirit, then take action. Don't just consume this message. Let it confirm what heaven's already been whispering. Like this word, if it's speaking directly to your season, share it with someone still torn between the call and the crowd. Subscribe so you don't miss what God continues to release for the remnant. And if this ministry has blessed you, if it's been a well in your wilderness, consider sowing into it. Every gift, small or large, helps this message continue to reach those who are starving for spiritual depth. This isn't about building a platform. It's about building a generation that can't be bought. You're not here by chance. You were drawn to this word because heaven knew what you needed before you did. You're not weak. You're not late. You're not forgotten. You're in transition. And you're not transitioning alone. You're being led by the Spirit who sees the full picture, who knows exactly what needs to fall off before your next door opens, who is calling you out, not to leave you empty, but to lead you into overflow. So, unfollow what's finished and walk forward without flinching, because what's ahead won't just bless you, it will define you. There is a quiet danger in returning to what God has already removed. A subtle rebellion that disguises itself as nostalgia. The memory of what once worked becomes a temptation to resurrect it, to breathe life back into something heaven has already declared finished. But no matter how familiar it feels, no matter how much comfort it once brought, if God has departed from it, so must you. You cannot carry the weight of promise while still dragging the remains of past seasons. God is not in what's over. He is in what's next. And for those who are truly surrendered, moving forward means refusing to relive what God has buried. The temptation to resurrect dead seasons often comes in moments of weariness, when the wilderness stretches longer than expected, when clarity fades and loneliness increases, when the silence of God seems louder than the promises once heard. The heart begins to look backward just for a moment. It says, just to remember how it used to feel. But even that brief glance can be costly. Lot's wife didn't rebel with her feet. She did it with her eyes. One backward look turned her into a monument of what could never move forward again. That single moment of sentimental rebellion froze her destiny, and she was never mentioned again. There is a reason why God closes doors and seals them shut. It is not cruelty, it is mercy. Mercy that refuses to allow us to settle for yesterday's bread when fresh manna is being prepared. Mercy that prevents us from pouring new oil into broken, contaminated vessels. Trying to breathe life into what God has ended is not restoration, it's resistance. There is a difference between remembering and resurrecting. God never said to forget what He's done, but He did command not to return to what He's finished. Looking back with reverence is worship, but looking back with longing becomes rebellion. The word recorded in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 10, warns us, do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. The past always appears softer in hindsight, but it is a distortion, a mirage, a crafted illusion of comfort, carefully edited by memory to make captivity seem like home. What God is doing now requires all of you, your attention, your focus, your faith. You cannot walk in forward momentum while your heart is still tied to dead timelines. And no matter how much potential something once had, if heaven has lifted from it, no effort on your part can bring it back to life. God is not interested in prolonging what has expired. He is not reviving a system just because it once served you. The anointing was never meant to be domesticated, and the moment you try to recreate what was, you limit what could be. Some of the warfare you're facing isn't from the enemy, it's from clinging to what you should have released. You're exhausted because you're trying to resurrect something that no longer has heaven's breath on it. You're discouraged because you're investing energy into what no longer carries grace. This is not the season to bargain with the past. This is the season to bury it. Not with bitterness, but with honor. Thank God for what it gave you, for who you became in it, for what it revealed and refined. Then release it with reverence and walk away without regret. Because where God is leading you requires both hands free. One hand cannot cling to the grave while the other reaches for glory. There is a difference between healing and holding on. True healing doesn't require reliving, it requires surrender. The proof that you're healed is not in how well you remember, but in how deeply you're able to release. You're not walking away from promise. You're walking into it. But you can't carry it if your hands are full of yesterday's dust. God is not waiting for you to fix what He ended. He's waiting for you to step into what He's unfolding. This is the shift between old and new wineskin, between wandering and inhabiting, between reflection and revelation. What's ahead is not a repeat. It's a rebirth. So, bury the season. Mourn it if you must. Honor it with stillness. But don't you dare go back and dig it up again. Don't scroll through it in your mind like it's still yours. Don't speak life over what God has pronounced dead. Let the dead be dead. Let the finished be finished. And let the future find you with arms wide open. There is a power in obedience that doesn't always make sense in the moment. Sometimes it looks like surrendering what little you have left. Sometimes it means saying yes without seeing the full picture. Sometimes it's standing still while everything in you wants to run. But when heaven gives a command, breakthrough is hidden in the response, not in the explanation. There are moments in your journey where God doesn't require you to understand. He requires you to obey. Not later. Not when it's convenient. Now. Because timing in the Spirit is not a suggestion, it's a door. And that door doesn't stay open forever. Obedience is not emotional. It's positional. You don't obey because it feels good. You obey because His voice is enough. Because your love for Him is louder than your logic. Because faith, real faith, walks when the ground looks fragile. This is the test of the chosen. Will you say yes when the outcome is uncertain? Will you surrender control when your flesh craves confirmation? Will you move forward even when your heart still grieves the last season? Delayed obedience is still disobedience. And partial obedience is rebellion, dressed in good intentions. God isn't asking for your opinion on the assignment. He's asking for your availability. He's asking for your full yes. The words spoken through the prophet Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 19, declares, "If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land." The promise is not for the perfect. It's for the obedient, not for the talented, or the popular, or the qualified. It's for the ones who say, "Yes, Lord, even now, even here, even when I don't feel ready." God doesn't bless potential. He blesses position. And obedience is the position that pulls the unseen into reality. Every miracle you've prayed for is tethered to a moment of obedience you haven't fully stepped into yet. You've been asking God to move, while God's been asking you to respond. This is not a one-sided dialogue. This is covenant. When He speaks, you act. And when you act, heaven releases what it's been holding. But here's the truth. Most people don't miss their calling because they weren't chosen. They miss it because they hesitated. They let fear edit what God wrote in bold. They let other people's comfort zones become their ceiling. They waited for conditions to feel perfect. Instead of trusting that His voice was the green light, faith doesn't wait for confirmation from culture. It moves when the Spirit whispers, "Go." And when you say yes, fully, completely. Without keeping one foot in the past, you will feel heaven shift in your direction. Doors will unlock that were once sealed. Relationships will align that you didn't have to manipulate. Resources will arrive that didn't come from hustle, but from holy alignment. Because favor follows obedience. And right now, there's something God is asking of you. It may not be loud, it may not be dramatic, but you know it's Him. Maybe it's letting go of something small. Maybe it's moving on from something familiar. Maybe it's trusting Him when your savings account doesn't agree. Maybe it's simply choosing stillness when everything in you wants to take control. Whatever it is, He's waiting not for perfection, but for your yes. There is weight behind your agreement. The heavens respond to it. Angels are dispatched because of it. Generations are impacted through it. Your yes today plants the seed for harvests you haven't even imagined yet. You don't need a crowd to obey. You don't need a platform. You don't need a full plan. All you need is the kind of surrender that says, even if no one claps, I will follow. And that yes becomes the sound that shifts atmospheres. So if this word is confirming what's already stirring in your spirit, if you know you're standing at the edge of your next level, if you feel the tension between fear and faith, then respond. Comment 555. Type this number as a prophetic act. Simple, clear, weighty. 555 is not just a number. It is a divine pattern of grace multiplied, a signal of spiritual movement, and a call to alignment. In biblical symbolism, 5 represents grace, and when it is tripled, it carries the weight of urgency and fullness, heaven declaring, "The window is open. Walk through it now." 555 means you are standing at the edge of something significant. It is heaven's reminder that the grace you need has already been provided, but you must step into it. The delay is over. The door is open. The grace to obey, to move, to release, to rise, it's already here. Typing 555 isn't just agreement. It's your yes in motion, your surrender sealed, your faith activated. Let it be your signal to heaven. I choose to move in grace, not fear. There is a moment in every divine journey when something or someone walks away, not with fanfare, not with final words. Sometimes there is no explanation at all. One day they were with you, the next they were gone, and in that void, confusion creeps in like fog. You wonder what went wrong. You search for closure in empty places. But heaven has already answered with silence. And the silence is protection. There are departures that feel like betrayal, but are actually release. Relationships that felt right in one season but become burdens in the next. You grieve what left without realizing it had to go because it was never assigned to your next. Not every connection is covenant. Some are seasonal scaffolding necessary for a time, but dangerous if kept past their purpose. When God begins to elevate you, He also begins to separate you. The pruning does not always come through enemies. Sometimes it comes through friends. Sometimes it comes through silence, not strife, distance, not drama. And while the human heart cries for reasons, the Spirit whispers, "Let it go." Trying to drag every relationship into your next season is not loyalty, it's disobedience. And disobedience never leads to destiny. God is not cruel in His removals. He is intentional. He saw what you couldn't. Conversations behind your back. Privat compromise. Incompatible values. Misaligned spirits. Unspoken jealousy. What walked away wasn't just a person, it was a weight. There is no promotion without separation. You prayed for clarity. This is clarity. You asked for protection. This is protection. You asked for acceleration. This is heaven lightening your load. Because to walk fast, you must walk free. The Word of God reveals this mystery in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 2. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. This is not rejection, it is refinement. The cutting is not about pain, it's about purpose. You were not abandoned, you were advanced. God knows what relationships carry unspoken resistance to your calling. He knows the hidden tension, the buried resentment, the quiet competitiveness that erodes unity, and instead of asking you to confront it all, He simply removes it. And still, we wrestle. We want closure. We want to talk it through. We want to explain ourselves, justify our distance, find peace with what ended. But sometimes, the most spiritual thing you can do is stop chasing closure and start embracing clarity. Let it go. Don't mourn what God has already moved. Don't chase what heaven has released. If it had to leave for you to grow, then that is mercy, not loss. God never removes without replacing, but what He replaces is often invisible until obedience is complete. Sometimes, it takes being alone to realize how much noise you allowed near you. Solitude is not punishment, it's refinement. The quiet places expose what crowds kept hidden. They reveal motives, strip away approval addiction, and force you to see who you are when no one is clapping. It's there in the absence of familiar voices that God begins to speak in new dimensions. He gives you language for your next assignment. He downloads vision that isn't shaped by outside expectation. He restores your voice, free from influence and interruption. And what feels like a loss is actually an upgrade in discernment. Because now, you're not choosing people out of comfort, you're discerning them through purpose. Not everyone who started with you is called to finish with you. That's not bitterness. That's Bible. Even Jesus, on His way to the cross, allowed some to stay behind. Not because they were bad, just because they weren't built for what was next. And neither are some of the people you've tried to hold on to. The peace of this season will not be found in fixing what fell apart. It will be found in trusting that God knows how to filter your circle without your assistance. This is divine subtraction, holy disconnection. And the sooner you release what walked away, the sooner your hands are free to receive what's coming. You don't need to explain who left. You don't need to chase their reasons. You don't need to reopen doors God has shut in wisdom. Keep walking. What is ahead is worth more than what left. What is coming carries more fruit than what stayed. And what you are stepping into demands a level of focus that distractions disguised as friendship will only delay. So, walk light, walk clear, walk free. You are not being punished by their absence. You are being positioned by their exit. There are seasons where the voice of God does not compete with noise. He simply waits for it to die down. The wilderness is not punishment. It is an invitation into stillness, a classroom where every false voice is silenced, and only what is eternal remains. God draws those he loves into the wilderness not to isolate, but to initiate, not to condemn, but to commission. He does not remove the crowd to harm you. He removes the crowd to reveal himself. There are things he cannot say in the noise of the city that he will whisper to you in the silence of the desert. And though it may feel barren, the wilderness is rich with hidden purpose. Every dry place has been hand-selected by heaven to teach you what no platform ever could: how to recognize the voice that created you. In the wilderness, your titles don't matter. Your accomplishments go quiet. Your audience disappear. And that is where identity is forged, not just felt. It is in this lonely, sacred stretch of space where the noise of man fades and the nearness of God sharpens. It's where Moses was stripped of the palace and became familiar with the mountain, where David traded the courts of the king for the fields of sheep and songs, where Elijah fled from the heights of victory into a cave and encountered the whisper of God. Not in the wind, not in the fire, not in the earthquake, but in the stillness. And it is where Jesus himself was led, not by the enemy, but by the Spirit. 40 days of testing, hunger, silence, and confrontation. Not to weaken him, but to witness through him. He came out of the wilderness with clarity, power, and divine focus. This sacred pattern is not coincidental. It is woven into the blueprint of preparation. You do not walk in authority without walking through isolation. You do not carry power unless you first carry silence. And this truth is echoed in the book of Hosea, chapter 2, verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness, and speak tenderly to her. End of quote. God calls you into the wilderness, not to scold you, but to speak to you, not with noise, but with tenderness, with clarity that only stillness can produce. When all else is stripped, his whisper becomes unmistakable. If the wilderness is calling you now, it is not to crush you, it is to clarify you. Because what you learn in the wilderness, you carry into the war, and what you become in the hidden place, you reveal in the public place. The wilderness is the womb of true authority. It teaches you that you are not defined by outcomes. You are not moved by applause. You are not driven by affirmation. You are rooted in presence, and presence becomes everything. In the wilderness, you stop praying for escape and start asking for endurance. You stop measuring fruit by visibility and begin measuring it by obedience. You no longer pray for ease, you pray for encounter. What is born here will last, because it is birthed through fire. Not flattery, through pressure. Not popularity, through tears. Not titles. The wilderness breaks what needed to be broken. It crushes every idol built out of insecurity. It reveals every dependency that isn't God. It pulls the scaffolding off the soul until only truth remains. You learn how to be faithful with no reward, how to stand when no one is watching, how to pray when no one is listening, how to obey when no one is clapping, and when you emerge, you are no longer the same, because now you walk not with hype, but with heaven's weight. Those who are truly called are always trained in hidden places, not because God is hiding them from people, but because He is hiding them for purpose. If you feel overlooked, it may be because God has hidden you, not to punish, but to preserve what is still being refined. The oil is not yet ready. The roots are still reaching deeper, and when they are deep enough, the fruit will not fail. Let them grow, because when your roots go deep in the wilderness, you will not be shaken in the storm. You won't be swayed by trends or taken out by trials. You will know who you are, not by echo, but by encounter. So honor the wilderness. This is the place of purification, the space where the called are tested, not for destruction, but for deployment. You're not lost. You're being located. You're not waiting. You're being formed. You're nearing the edge now. The ground beneath your feet may feel unfamiliar, but that's because you're standing on the threshold of transformation. This is not just another season. It's the crossing point, the line where wilderness ends and inheritance begins. But before you cross, heaven demands something deeper than excitement. It demands consecration. You don't step into destiny casually. You step in, set apart. This is the moment where distractions must die and discernment must rise, where the chatter of others fades and the voice of the shepherd becomes final, where you no longer wonder who you are, you walk in who you've been becoming all along. It's not enough to feel called. You must be clean, not perfect, but postured, not flawless, but surrendered. God can only trust elevation to those who have been emptied, because if pride comes with you, it will corrupt what was meant to crown you. There is something sacred about a remnant that refuses to rush, choosing instead to be refined. Do not resent the slow. Do not curse the quiet. Some of the richest oil is produced in stillness. The kind of oil that doesn't just inspire, it breaks yokes. The kind of oil that flows even heavier in the fire. You were not born to entertain spiritual crowds. You were born to carry kingdom weight, and those who carry weight must be crushed first. That crushing the tears, the isolation, the misunderstood obedience, that's what qualifies you to stand where others would collapse. You weren't taught by trends. You were trained in secret. And now, heaven is saying, get ready. You're about to step in. Oh, but before you do, take inventory, not of what you have, but of what you're still holding that can't go with you. Pride, offense, fear, the need to be understood, all of it must be laid down. This crossing demands purity. God told Joshua to command the people to consecrate themselves before they crossed the Jordan. The land was promised, but their posture had to be realigned. As it is written in the book of Joshua, chapter 3, verse 5, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Tomorrow is coming, but today is where alignment happens, where motives are tested, where obedience is refined in the fire of surrender. And yes, you'll be tempted to compare your pace to someone else's, to feel late just because others are loud. But remember, noise is not proof of movement. Speed is not the standard in the kingdom. Obedience is. And obedience looks different for the marked ones. It might mean leaving comfort behind, saying no to good things that aren't God things, waiting longer than your emotions are comfortable with. But those who build with God's timing build what lasts. This is the moment where you step fully out of agreement with the version of you that lived for survival and step into the version that is ready for assignment. This is the place where you stop over-explaining and start walking like the process has already produced the oil. Let this word not just pass over you. Let it press into you. Let it reshape your posture before the promise opens wide. Like this word, if you feel the Spirit bearing witness inside of you, share it with someone standing on the same threshold. Comment something simple below. Let heaven know your heart is in agreement. Subscribe if your soul says, I need to stay connected to this well. Sent. And if this space has been a stream of living water for your spirit, if God has confirmed, restored, or awakened something in you through these words, then prayerfully consider sowing a seed into this work, not out of pressure, not for transaction, but as an act of covenant, because when you eat from a table that nourishes your soul, it's kingdom honor to help sustain it. Spiritual wells must be protected, and sometimes that protection looks like partnership, like saying, I won't just receive from this, I'll help carry it forward. No, we are not building a brand. We are cultivating a remnant, a generation that won't bow to culture or blend into compromise. A people who live consecrated and walk in weight. You've walked, you've trusted, you've endured, and now, heaven says, prepare. Because what you're about to step into will not just fulfill your prayers, it will fulfill God's purpose through you. So hold your peace, sharpen your gaze, anchor your heart, because you are not stepping into the next chapter alone. Heaven is walking with you, and the earth is about to witness it. There comes a moment in the journey of every chosen one where the silence of God does not indicate absence but authority, where the quiet is not emptiness but weight, and the stillness is not hesitation but a holy pause. Full of purpose, you are not being delayed. You are being set up. Heaven is staging the next unveiling. Not in haste, but in exactness. God is not rushed by time. He works in timing, and timing, in the Spirit, is not simply about sequence, it's about strategy. What looks slow to you is precise to Him. This is why trust is not built in answered prayers. Trust is built in unanswered silence. The places where your logic has no explanation, the spaces where obedience feels like walking blindfolded across a tightrope of faith, the in-between, where what was no longer fits, but what's coming hasn't fully arrived. And still, you're asked to stand. Still, you're called to trust. This is the tension of transition. You have left Egypt, but you haven't yet seen Canaan. You're no longer who you were, but not fully who you're becoming. It is here that many turn back, not because they don't love God, but because they can't tolerate the invisible stretch. But what if the stretch is where the strength is being born? What if the space between the promise spoken and the promise fulfilled is not empty, but packed with unseen glory? What if the quiet is not a void, but an incubation chamber? The child does not doubt the parent just because the hallway is quiet. The seed does not accuse the soil of abandonment just because the sun has not yet broken through. The chosen do not flinch in the silence. They listen. They lean in. They understand. God speaks loudly, even when He says nothing, because in the kingdom, silence is often the sound of trust. The more you grow, the less God needs to explain, because maturity learns to move without needing confirmation. Obedience learns to bow without conditions. Faith learns to worship not just when the blessing is in hand, but while it's still on the way. And it is in this place, the in-between, the undefined, the stretched, that you are not being broken, you are being fortified. Scripture gives us a picture of this process in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 3. For the appointed time, it hastens toward the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it will certainly come. It will not delay. The vision is not lost. It's simply not ready. And neither are you not fully. There are layers of you still shedding. There are fears still dying. There are roots still deepening. Because the thing God is building through you must last. God does not give fragile glory to impatient hearts. So if you're in the stretch, if you're in the hallway between doors, if you're in the quiet that makes no sense, know this: you are not being ignored. You are being entrusted. Entrusted with waiting well. Entrusted with carrying oil in silence. Entrusted with becoming, even when becoming hurts. This moment is shaping your hearing, deepening your knowing, exposing what still shakes under pressure. It's not punishment, it's preparation. It's heaven asking, can I trust you with delay and not lose you to doubt? Some of the greatest faith you will ever display is in the days between the instructions and the outcome, when no one's watching, when no reward is given, when you obey anyway. This is where true power is born, not in noise, but in the quiet yes. The yes that doesn't need applause. The yes that doesn't need a sign. The yes that says, even if I see nothing, I'll keep moving because you said so. Olu, it's in that obedience, in that stretch, that your roots grow deep. And when the storm comes later, and it will, you won't be moved, because you were anchored not in feelings, but in faith. So don't curse this space. Don't rush through it. Don't despise the silence. Instead, ask yourself, who am I becoming in this tension? Because that answer matters more than how fast the promise comes. God is not just trying to deliver a result. He is shaping a vessel. And vessels that carry glory must be tested in silence. So stand still. Walk forward. Trust deeply. Because even when nothing around you is moving, something inside you is being made unstoppable. There is a shift that cannot be undone, a turning that does not go backward. Once heaven marks you, once you've walked through fire and remained standing, there is no returning to smallness. No going back to blending in. No shrinking to fit rooms you've outgrown. You are not who you were. Not anymore. Something in you has changed, not on the surface, but at the root. You've been re-anchored, reformed, rebuilt in the shadows while no one was watching. And now, what was once just a whisper in your spirit has become a quiet roar in your bones. I was made for this, not for fame, not for platform, but for purpose. You were crushed, but not broken, stripped, but not destroyed. And in that pressing, you discovered the difference between performance and presence, between applause and anointing, between influence and true, heavenly authority. There is an authority that only comes from survival, not the kind that begs to be noticed, but the kind that shifts rooms without speaking, the kind that carries the weight of heaven's oil because it was crushed for it. You can't fake this. You can't manufacture it. It comes through obedience in secret places. You are not standing where you are today because of chance. You are standing because you didn't quit. because you said yes when it cost you everything, because you believed even when evidence was absent, because you chose stillness over striving and presence over performance. And now heaven is not just looking at you, heaven is leaning on you. You've become the kind of vessel God can trust, not because you're perfect, but because you're postured, not because you have all the answers, but because you've learned how to listen, how to weep in worship, how to walk with fire in your belly and humility in your hands. You've passed through the wilderness. You've endured the silence. You've let go of what couldn't follow you. And you've made it to this moment not by accident, but by design. The shift happening in your life now is not about elevation for your name. It's about manifestation of His will. Your life is becoming a testimony not just of endurance, but of divine reversal, of heaven invading earth through surrendered vessels, of promises fulfilled not on your timeline, but in perfect, holy timing. It is no longer a question of if you're called. You know it now. It burns in you. It disrupts your comfort. It rearranges your plans. It follows you into every room, and it refuses to let you settle for less. And from here on, everything changes. Not because the battle ends, but because now you know who you are. You're not just surviving the storm, you've become the kind who can speak to it. You carry clarity that can't be shaken, discernment that can't be manipulated, peace that doesn't come from circumstance, but from intimacy, as declared in the book of Luke, chapter 10, verse 19. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. Arnett, this is the rise of the remnant. Those who are done pretending, done compromising, done negotiating their call. This is the moment where your name doesn't need to be known, because your spirit is already recognized in the heavenlies. Demons tremble not because you shout, but because your presence is saturated in obedience. Hell is nervous, not because you're loud, but because you're aligned. You are no longer wandering. You are walking in assignment, and you will not walk alone. Every step forward will echo with the sound of unseen armies. Every door you walk through will carry the residue of prayers prayed in secret. Every act of obedience from this day on will trigger consequences in both realms. Because now, you're not just a believer, you're a carrier of glory, a bearer of weight, a witness to a generation that's hungry for something real. This is your moment, not of arrival but of activation. God is not finished with you, He's just beginning through you. So don't shrink back. Don't question if you're ready. Heaven already answered that when it preserved you through the breaking. When others fell away, you remained. When others compromised, you chose consecration. And now, what's coming won't look like survival, it will look like dominion. You'll walk in rooms you once prayed to enter, not to be seen, but to shift the atmosphere. You'll open your mouth and see chains fall. You'll dream, decree, and watch it happen. Not because you're powerful in yourself, but because the power in you has finally found full surrender. This is more than a moment. This is your unfolding, chosen one. If you've made it this far, it wasn't by accident. It was by appointment. Every word you've just walked through wasn't crafted to entertain. It was commissioned to awaken. Something in your spirit has been stirred. Something in your posture has shifted. You cannot go back to who you were before this. You've been called higher, marked deeper, realigned with something eternal. The wilderness didn't waste you, it witnessed you. The breaking didn't bury you, it birthed you. And what you carry now is not just a message, it's movement. You are walking fire, living oil, heaven's evidence wrapped in obedience. So don't keep this word to yourself. If it spoke to your soul, if it affirmed what God's been whispering to you in private, share it. Let someone else be reminded that they too are chosen, that they too are not forgotten. Like this message, if your spirit bore witness to even one line, comment below. Something simple, something true. Let it be your digital altar. Subscribe if your heart says, "This is my well. I need to stay connected." End 4. And if this message has become a lamp to your feet, if this voice has carried you in your dark place, then ask the Lord if you're meant to sow into it. Not to buy a blessing, but to sustain the very ground that's been feeding your faith. Because revival doesn't ride on personality. It rides on people like you who are willing to pour back into what's pouring out. You are not just watching a word, you are becoming the word sent forth.